Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please go to the LinkedIn Live video feed, the link to which I have now placed in the chat room. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please write in the chat room or turn on your microphone to say hi. We'll be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guest is Henry Walters, a poet and author of The Nature Thief, which was published in 2022. Henry, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit, Henry, about yourself and how you became a poet. It's not every day we get to meet poets.
It's not every day a poet gets to explain his own existence. I grew up in the Midwest. I was born in Chicago and grew up in quite flat country in southern Michigan. And I'd like to think that there's some relationship between the landscape and imagination. This is a very flat place. And like teenagers all over the world, I was sure that where I lived, nothing happened that mattered, and I couldn't wait to see elsewheres. When a snowy owl perched on the picnic table, that was an event. When a Clydesdale was worn across the street at the horse farm, that was an event. But it seemed like deep history, history that transcended me and transcended my community, was somehow hidden. And it was there, but I didn't know it. And so I took some solace in reading, in myths, particularly of from the Greek and Roman world. Ended up taking Latin and Greek by correspondence course in high school, and being taken by that sense of deep history.
Okay, and tell us. So then you eventually ended up in Cambridge, Mass, and you studied Latin and Greek there. Did you find what you were looking for when you got to then dive into the classics?
I didn't know what I was looking for, but I was taken under the wing by some wonderful teachers and fellow students there. Found myself in a poetry course of Jory Graham's. I had no business being there, really, but found a sense of the theatrical, some sense of the world, depending on what happened in that classroom, depending on what we wrote, depending on what we read, how we responded to each other, that definitely informed my sense of what it meant to write and what it meant to read.
Wow. Okay. So now this brings us to our first roundtable. Tell us a little bit about what poetry is. So when I think of poetry, immediately, as you said, I think of, I don't think of drama, but I do think of Shakespeare. And I think that, okay, well, Shakespeare is known to have written some poems as well as writing plays, right? So when I think of poetry, I think of short, sentences that are somehow rhyming or something. I don't think of something upon which the world depends. Tell us about poetry.
Yeah, so many scholars, poets, readers, lovers and haters of poetry have knocked themselves about the sconce trying to formulate a definition, and are frequently defeated in doing so, that somehow none of those parameters, many of which you just listed, none of those seem to really hold. Wordsworth famously said, well, it's the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, which sums up quite a bit of especially Romantic era English poetry. But of course, as soon as you define it, then poets, being contrarians, find a way to defeat the definition. I guess I'd like to maybe move from what it is to what it does. And there's a famous letter of Emily Dickinson in which she doesn't try to say what it is so much as its effect on her. She writes, "If I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold no fire can ever warm me, I know that is poetry. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. Those are the only ways I know it. Is there any other way?" And one thing I like about that is that it's a little threatening. It feels, the top of your head being taken off, your body being chilled to the bone. These aren't feelings that we necessarily seek out, but they're things that happen to us and that are nonetheless important. And that poetry has both this jovial Wordsworthian happy romantic face, and also this darker, colder, and possibly murderous face that Dickinson talks about. That's important to me too, and also seems true to the sense of theater. The two masks, the comedic and the tragic, that those are very difficult to keep in tension, to keep in the same room. And one place they do exist together is the theater.
Okay, and before we go move into the theater, theatricality of poetry, I'd just like to ask you. So I come from kind of a music background, and in musicology, it's very famous right now. It's completely a la mode, where we talk about European, the supremacy of European music, meaning that classical music is somehow better than Aboriginal music in South America, or it's more advanced, it's a greater art form, it's for smarter people. So tell us, does poetry now, because you come from, of course, a similar educational background, which is very conservative, we should say, and so you studied classics, Latin, the most conservative of them. So where can poetry be also then, for instance, rap, or can it be, where does it exist? Does it exist merely on the page, written on a page between 1800 and 1900?
I sure hope not. But it's a crucial question. Poetry has so many traditions, many of which are being formed and added to and elaborated right at this moment. The traditions that really draw me are ones where the page is not primary. They're really oral traditions. So that includes what we now think of as the highfalutin Greeks. Those used to be Homer and his predecessors, unnamed generations of bards singing the same stories of heroes and Troy to each other, to listeners in pretty lowbrow places. That oral tradition existed and flourished long before it was written down on the page. The same goes for the poets of the Anglo-Saxon tradition, Beowulf and those old English poems. I'm thinking of the Scotch-Irish balladeers of the 16th, 17th, of the 16th, 17th, 18th century, and thinking of folk music traditions that are alive and well, have made it all the way to the Americas and flourish here. Those oral traditions, although we think of them as sort of in poetry's prehistory somehow, those are the ones that most excite me, and that I think my poetry is in conversation with.
Fantastic. And clearly those traditions, those rich traditions, do have moved humanity in so many ways, they have been such an integral part of the human spirit and of our society. So now let's move on. Tell us about this idea, theatricality of poetry. So I told you before, Shakespeare, I think of Shakespeare when I think of poetry. He wrote poems. He also wrote plays. You're saying inside the poem, there's some kind of play. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Oftentimes when we think of the nexus of poetry and theater, it's, as you say, Simeon, it's poetry coming on stage in the form of blank verse. I guess what I'm suggesting is the metaphor of the theater as a description of what it's like to read. I think what's oftentimes anxiety provoking or frustrating about poetry itself is the seeming passivity of our role as a member of an audience. We're asked to digest a poem with our senses, and we imagine that we could absorb it as a piece of music. But then the poem speaks to us in words, and they don't seem to have any sensuous frisson. And the reaction's often, well, what is that chunk of language, and what am I supposed to feel that I'm not feeling? In the theater, our role as a member of the audience is a little clearer. We come in knowing that we are not only allowed, but supposed to laugh and cry and clap and occasionally boo. And in the case of a fire alarm, we're supposed to not panic. And it's a small role. We're usually not lit by the stage lights. We're not on stage itself. But we understand that without an audience present, the play wouldn't actually be taking place. It would just be a rehearsal. It would be a ghost of a show. And I feel that, or hope to feel that, when I'm sitting down with a book or when I'm hearing a poet read. And I think in a strange sense, poetry can be the most radical kind of theater, in which the audience, the reader, is himself or herself actually the stage on which the poem is playing out, so that you're not passive, but you are participating.
And how do we know then, as you say, okay, the reader has an active role by going to buy the book or download the book and then open the book and sit down and read it. Tell us, how do you know then that you've entered into the play?
I think you know when maybe the top of your head doesn't actually come off, but you know when somehow you are destabilized by the thing you are reading, so that the person you thought you are, the place you thought you stood, is no longer entirely satisfactory as a definition of who you are. So I'll try to give you an example here. I thought we ought to bring out a little John Keats. His birthday was yesterday, Halloween. There's a little fragment he wrote toward the end of his life. He was actually working on writing a play called Otho the Great, which he never finished. And when I'm asking you to hear this poem anew, it's partly that context that is part of the theater of the poem. Here's a poet whose a number of members of his family have already died from tuberculosis. He's nursed them himself. Being trained as a doctor, he knows perfectly well that he himself has signs of tuberculosis and that his days are numbered. He's writing this play that he knows he will probably never finish. And in the margins, written at an angle, he takes time out to write the following, which has no title, no addressee. This living hand, now warm and capable of earnest grasping, would, if it were cold, and in the icy silence of the tomb, so haunt thy days and chill thy dreaming nights, that thou would wish thine own heart dry of blood, so in my veins red life might stream again, and thou be conscience calmed. See, here it is. I hold it towards you. having just been out Halloween trick-or-treating with an 8-year-old last night. I find none of the skeletons and goblins half as scary as this poem. It's quite spooky, given that it's a voice from the living speaking as if it were dead, or asking you to imagine, what if this hand were dead, and asking it of a thou, who is not specified. Who is this thou is the first thing I ask. In normal speech, when someone says you, I turn around and look. So my first instinct is that the poem is addressed somehow to me, even though obviously I didn't know Keats. And when I get to this line, second to last line, and thou be conscience calmed, here is where I begin to be a little unstable and ask myself, did I have a bad conscience that it needs to be calmed in this way? And if I doubted that I was the one addressed, there's this ending. See, here it is. I hold it, meaning my hand, the living hand, towards you. Something funny is going on here, which we might not be attuned to, which is that we have thou, 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 thou through the whole poem. And then at the end, I hold it towards you. This is a distinction that we no longer really register. The difference between a singular thou and a plural you, or an informal thou and a more formal you. But here in the actual grammar of the poem, something is being made a little unstable. And I myself don't know quite where I stand. Am I the one wishing to give Keats more life? Am I actually giving him more life by reading this poem again, raising his hand, his handwriting up to the light? Or am I on the outs? Am I singular? Am I plural? That's the kind of oscillating between possibilities that poetry is so good for.
Wow. And so tell us a little bit about this next slide we're going to see, where we're talking about there's Keats himself. Tell us about this and the next slide we're going to see.
This is a portrait of Keats drawn by his friend Joseph Severn when he was on his deathbed. The dark of the pillow sort of meant to bring out this profile. I could wax on and on about Keats forever, but some of the drama of his poems is informed by the life itself. That the poems sound from time to time, not only this fragment, but the other odes sound like one written by someone from beyond the grave, and someone with such a deep consciousness of his own mortality that it seems to sift in and penetrate and enliven the poems that he left us. Yeah, I can't read them or say them out loud without feeling it.
Okay, fantastic. And tell us about Love Without Hope.
Okay, this is a small, also on its surface, not such a scary poem. I'll take us through it a little quickly here. This is by the poet Robert Graves, an Englishman. Love Without Hope. Love without hope, as when the young bird catcher swept off his tall hat to the squire's own daughter. So let the imprisoned larks escape and fly, singing about her head as she rode by. I've taken out this penultimate word here because a lot is riding on this question of whether it's rides or road. It's printed as road, and that's what the poem is. But I guess I'd like to suggest that the theater of this poem depends on not knowing what that word might be. I'll try to say something about it here. There's something about this the title itself, Love Without Hope, that is two-pronged and goes potentially in two directions. One is the idea of love simply as a noun, right? This is an example of love, the noun, loving without hope. And here he's going to give you an image that somehow brings that to life. The other is that in English, a verb all alone, the only form of a verb without a subject, is the imperative, the command, right? And some people can, when they're first confronted with this poem, hear it as a command: do this, love without hope, as when. In case you don't know how to love without hope, try this on for size. And if you read it in that way, as a command addressed to you particularly, look, this is going to change your life, do this. You are somehow disappointed. And if you go back to the poem here, you can see how that happens. Love without hope. Try to hear this just one time through as a verb. As when the young birdcatcher swept off his tall hat to the squire's own daughter. Here's an example of a time that it actually happened. This birdcatcher standing by the side of the road, letting all the goods of his life go by for the sake of this beauty passing. So let. Here, there's the question of who the subject of the sentence is, right? Is this another imperative? Do this. Let your own imprisoned larks escape and fly, or is this a past tense verb? The young birdcatcher let the imprisoned larks escape and fly. Do you follow me here? If you hear it as an imperative, do this, then what should this verb be toward the end? Let the imprisoned larks escape and fly, singing about her head as she rides by. You would expect. You expect to have some chance to love in this particular way, to give this particular theatrical gesture to the unwinnable love. What's disappointing about the poem in the end is that you don't get that chance, that what is being enacted is loving without hoping. You may want to love in this way, you may want to be the young birdcatcher, but you don't get to be. It's already happened. This is only a poem, this is only an example. It's a bit of a trick of a poem where you're invited to feel something that you're then told, no, I'm sorry, you can't feel that. And there's a theater in that. It's a very small theater. It happens only in the head, but it's a theater nonetheless.
Fantastic. Wow. So poignant. So tell us now, you asked me to do something that I don't do for just anybody. You asked me to record one of Bach's Goldberg variations.
Having asked once, I wish I'd asked for all of them. You play beautifully, and it was such a wonderful surprise. Yes, I'd asked for a little bit of variation 5 of this Goldberg variation that we might listen to quickly. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, these poems are cherry-picked examples, and my mind would not have worked that way. If I'd read these Keats or the Graves poem, I would have just taken it as at face value and moved on. But I guess I want to say that the theater of poetry isn't necessarily something you're doing intellectually. It's something the senses are doing on their own. When someone confronts a painting, the eye is already finding the form, sorting the colors, finding an image that is embedded there. And similarly in music, the ear is doing its own work, finding the voices, finding what is melody, what is harmony. It's not necessarily what we'd call an intellectual endeavor. So here's a point in the music where the voice, insofar as it is a voice, a melodic voice, seems to split into 2 parts. See if you can hear it here in the first 8 bars of this Goldberg variation number 5, played by Simeon Morrow. Make it go on.
That's it.
Thank you. That was wonderful. It's sorry, it's awfully fast. And I asked Simeon if he wouldn't mind playing it at a much slower tempo, listening just for the right hand, and particularly a place where the 16th notes of this melodic line begin trading places with a single repeated note. Maybe it's easier to hear if we play it slowed down. Step there. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll take a look at the score.
That'd be great. So in this mess of black notes here, if we look at measures 5, 6, and 7 toward the end of measure 5, just there, yeah. In the right hand, all of a sudden, every other note becomes the same G, just the repetition of a single note. Immediately the ear sorts that out as not part of the harmony that you would sing were there words to this song, but as a harmonic voice, so that the hand that was playing the melody is now in fact two voices, a dialogue going back and forth. I'd ask you to listen to it enough times until this magic trick takes place. It's a very small magic trick. It's the stock and trade of every musician worth their salt, not just Bach. But when it happens, a voice splitting into two and then collapsing back on itself and then splitting again, it makes the world seem more populous than it was before. You feel not stuck in your single self, but capable of many roles, just as the actor is capable of many roles. I think that's the poet's hope too.
Fantastic. So tell us about the poem Presto.
Sure. So this is a poem of mine, and I don't claim that it has any of Keats's or Graves or Bach's beauties around it, but it is a poem that is trying to ride on its own music, not to tell you what to think or even commanding you to do anything, loving without hoping, but a particular music and a particular music of childhood. So in the theater of this poem, you have to imagine yourself as a child again, talking to other children in that sort of pell-mell, over-the-top, unpunctuated way that children have when they're excited to be with each other. I'm thinking of a sleepover with cousins in an attic room when everyone's stuffed into a sleeping bag, and you know that parents can't hear you. And what is being said is often less important than the music with which you're saying it. In this case, the music of play and of game, and the exciting possibilities of what you can be within the rules of this unnamed game. So this is called Presto, which is the tempo marking for how it should be read. Let's play for real this time. I mean it, no matter what. The first one to speak is it. And after that, it's the thing you say that's it, all right? But after that, it's the way you say whatever you say. That's it. That's it. No matter what time it is, at school or recess. If the teacher talks, it's how she talks. That's it. And even at dinner or taking a bath, or if you're asleep, let's say, if you talk in your sleep and I hear you and it's like you're talking to men on the moon, that's it. You're talking to men on the moon, all right? No matter what, if you're wearing clothes or not, or if you're happy or sad or not, I mean it. Or if you're talking like you're dead, that's it. You're dead, all right? Or if you're dead for real, let's say, and it's like you're talking to me, that's it. You're talking to me, no matter what. And if tomorrow, if I talk like you, that's it. I'm talking you, all right? I mean it, no matter what. For real this time.
Lovely.
Um, as a poet's hope for an I to be talking you, whatever that would mean, even if it's not successful or affected here in this poem. Sometimes a poem's aim is more revealing than what it actually does, and that's as it is for the actor, so it is for the poet. A desire to speak in a voice even beyond his own.
Wow. And Henry, let's go on to our final poem, Pi enumerated to the 27th digit.
Yeah. So this poem too doesn't have the look of a poem in compressed rhyming lines, but it is sort of an ars poetica, a desire of the poet to say what kind of poem he would like to write, what sort of theaters he would like to make, even if they are yet unmade. This is pi enumerated to the 27th digit. The mathematician sits. She sits in the abstract. Abstracting, she considers a form like a poem that works in two directions at once. A poem that follows you around the room with its eyes, like Rembrandt's eyes in the self-portrait by Rembrandt. A poem like that cardboard effigy of Queen Elizabeth I at the county fair that kids run up and put their own faces into. That is, a poem with a gaping hole where its brain should be. Poems like dice made out of my own wisdom teeth. Clockwork poems that swing side to side like a hypnotist's watch. And after that, exploding poems. Poems that geyser up when you pop them in your mouth with a swig of Diet Cola. Poems that erase their own hoofprints as they trot along. Dream of a poem about cranes that, when folded into a paper crane, tells you exactly how to fold yourself into one. That gets smaller as it gets further away and more desirable. A poem that warns you with its right hand to watch your back while pinching the wallet from your pants pocket with the other. Dream of a poem that woos you by assuring you you're definitely not the one. Robert Graves' Love Without Hope, Keats's This Living Hand, Dylan's Don't Think Twice. A poem like a halo held in place by the good deeds of the Bernoulli principle. Palindromic poems, or is it hippodromic? Aerodromic? Poems that make simultaneous but contradictory sense in two unrelated languages. Poem of the power set, that is, according to Cantor, the poem of the set of all the subsets of the natural numbers. And this one, that can be rolled up into a spyglass or a spitball shooter. Adjustable funnel for solids that act as liquids. Flammable pipe for candling earwax. Poem that's lost its wool hat and wants to know if it can borrow yours, and maybe those gloves too, if you don't mind. Poem that has no intention of ever giving anything back. That keeps its shape no matter how small it gets. That keeps its shape no matter. That keeps its shape. That keeps that.
Fantastic. Wow. So Henry, tell us to conclude, what do you wish people get out of your writing? That writer in this drama. that reader in this drama reading your writing?
I'd like to feel themselves lit by the stage lights, whatever those stage lights are, feel themselves suddenly thrust into the spotlight and having to play, or feeling themselves being able to play. Language is a place of that possible game that has whose rules have not yet been set out. And I would love it if they felt themselves invited into it, not only to be witness to it.
Poet Henry Walters, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you also to Victoria and Frederick Mulligan for their support of this show, as well as Agnieszka and Benoit Rivolet. And thank you also to Mary Schlesinger for the lovely Viennese library you can see behind me. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From New London and Hancock, New Hampshire, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.
Bye.